So good morning and welcome to this second meetings on jobs in transition. As you know, the goal of this series of meetings is really to engage with actors that are professionally involved in the ecological transition, climate change, from different sectors at different governmental level. So in the first meeting, we had a conversation with an Italian energy cooperative working at the very local scale in the Italian territory. Today, we are engaged with an international institution, and we have the great pleasure to have with us 3 former colleagues and also 3 former students of our program in Science and Management of Climate Change. And I'll say just a few words about them. So we have Laura Bonzanigo, who is a senior water specialist at the World Bank. And before doing the PhD in Science and Management of Climate Change, she studied social anthropology in the UK, and she also had a master in irrigation water engineering from Wageningen University. Then we also have Gianleo Frisari, who is a climate change senior economist at the Inter-American Development Bank in Washington, D.C. He has also been working as senior analyst within climate change in the banking and finance sector. He has also the same PhD, but before doing the PhD program, he had a different career. He studied economics at Bocconi University in Milan. And then we also have Lorenzo Carrera, who is a senior disaster risk management specialist at the World Bank, and he has been working as a consultant in this field for quite some time. Before the PhD, he actually studied civil engineer and land and water conservation. So today, the plan of the day is actually to engage in a dialogue with them, in a conversation with them. And I would, let's say, get started by asking you a questions regarding whether you could describe a little bit what is the mandate and the mission of the multilateral development organizations and banks, such as the one in which you are working on. So maybe we can go around, we can start, I don't know, with Laura, and then Lorenzo and Gianleo, if you want to add on what Laura has to share with us. Thank you again for being with us. I'm really, really happy. Thank you.
Thank you, Enrica, for the introduction, and hello, everyone. I don't think I can see all of you, but nice to be here with you and to see Enrica sitting in my PhD advisor office. I don't know if you know Carlo Giupponi. So it's very nice to have it, even though it's not probably the best snapshot of Venice, it feels like home again. And thank you for your questions. So today, before this call, I thought, okay, let's see what people find out about the World Bank if you Google. And what I found, one of the first things that comes up is the World Bank is helping third world governments cripple their economies, mold their environments, and oppress their people. So I was like, okay, maybe we can start with some clarification of what we do and what MDBs are, because it's totally the opposite of that. And so first, multilateral development banks are MDBs, as we call them normally, as supranational institutions set up by sovereign states, which become their stakeholders. Their remits reflect the development aid and cooperation policies established and agreed upon by the states. And generally, I mean, there are several of them. They can be regional, and then the World Bank is global. They have the common task of fostering economic and social progress in developing countries by financing projects, supporting investment, generating capital. there are there are different ones. For example, the ones where we work, the World Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank. There's the African Development Bank, the Asian Development Bank, and many others. And today they cooperate at different levels. And actually, something of interest for you is that one of the main strategic areas of MDB's cooperation is on climate change, and particularly on how to make the Paris Agreement a reality. Even before the Paris Agreement, there was a lot of cooperation on climate change. For example, since 2011, these banks prepare a joint report of climate financing, for example. Other topics of cooperation are migration, jobs and growth, achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, and so forth. The World Bank specifically is where Lorenzo and I work on. It's global, so it has 189 member countries, and I think staff from 170 countries. We have offices all across the world. Lorenzo and I are currently in Ghana. The headquarters are in Washington, DC, and as it works, it obtains its funds from the capital of subscription of the member countries. The US is the main shareholder, and Japan and China second and third. Italy is around 9th or 10th. And they also get their funds from bond flotation on capital markets and net earning from the interest of their loans to middle income countries that we call the IBRD. The World Bank has two main goals. We call them the twin goals. One is ending extreme poverty, which basically means reducing the share of the global population in extreme poverty below 3%. I think is around 9% today. And then increasing share prosperity, which in practice means trying to increase the income of the poorest 40% of the population in every country we work with. And it comprises of two institutions, which we call the IBRD, is International Bank of Reconstruction and Development, and the IDA, the International Development Association. The former works more, provides loans to middle-income countries, just mostly, and also some credit-worthy poorer countries. For example, a lot of countries in Latin America, Southern Africa, and some countries in Asia. Whereas the IDA ones is the one, the institution we work mostly in Africa, which is the one that provides loans and grants to the poorest countries, usually at a very low interest rate when it's a loans, and we also provide grants. And how does it work? Basically, we work with governments that ask our support for example, financing this infrastructural project, and we support them across the whole chain. We don't just give them the money for the project, but we help them prepare it, we help them implement the project, or we help them design policy reforms, and we also do extensive research in all different topics. And so the government really, that's also often another misassumption, but our counterpart is really the government in the countries. Instead, the International Development Bank where Gianleo works is similar, but it focuses on Latin America and the Caribbean, and they also have as main goals to reduce poverty and inequality. And it works also across the very similar business lines. So I don't know if Lorenzo and Gianleo want to add anything on that, but we will also dive deeper in what we do later in the conversation. But anyway, back to you, Enrica.
Thank you, Laura. Maybe just one question before moving on with the agenda. Like the World Bank, for example, also does a lot of research activities, for example, in the context of climate change. Could you say something about how, let's say, about the relationship between, on the one hand, research, which is more like at the scientific level, and the practical activities that you do on the ground? Are the two related somehow, and how?
Yes, I can try to answer, then Lorenzo, Gianleo can say it. So at the World Bank, at least, we have different research at different levels. So we have a department that is purely devoted to research, where at the macroeconomic level, mostly that we call the DEC. and they are like they do like country-wide research and some of the flagships that we develop. Then we have research in the, for example, some of the latest research on like these global reports on climate change. For example, the one recently published is about the infrastructure gap and how much it will cost to cover it. Others is one a few years ago is the Shockwaves report about the cost for the poorest of climate change. These global reports, they cover all countries, and usually they help steer the agenda at the very high policy level, these reports. And then how do they, for example, the Shockwaves was published before Paris, the COP21 in Paris, and really helped drive the agenda. And then it also contributed indirectly to some of the targets that were agreed. And then in our operation, we try to turn that into reality. So at the global level, we have some numbers. What does it mean at the national level or the sub-regional level, and how can our operation help build towards these numbers? So in a way, yeah. So I think there are different levels. The research that directly influences our investment and operation, and then research more at the global level that influences the agenda more at the higher policy level. I don't know, Lorenzo, if you want to add something, or Gianleo, how is done in the IDB?
Yeah, very similar, to be honest. I think the profile of research at the IDB has let's say multi-purpose aspect, as Laura mentioned, and we have various research works both at research department works or mostly on macro and regional issues, and more with an academic perspective. We have research done to open new agendas. So similar reports to what Laura mentioned, we did a lot of work on sustainable infrastructure, on definition and infrastructure gaps, the attributes of sustainable infrastructure, even before we had projects that we could call sustainable infrastructure, and that those reports and the initial academic research in this case was done with Harvard, were actually instrumental in defining a strategy for sustainable infrastructure that then became the backbone of the new loans the IDB is doing now based on sustainable infrastructure. And then finally, there is a research that, let's say, borders consulting services. Many times, even for projects or for technical cooperations, we have specific research done for countries or specific sectors. And this goes hand in hand with the operation. Many times is part of the preparation work for a loan operation, and so is very applied and instrumental to the financial operation of the bank. But research, they say, it's probably what distinguishes us more as development banks compared to any other, let's say, lending institution.
So maybe, Laura, you explain how the two twin goals of, for example, the World Bank is really about poverty and prosperity. So then I think an interesting question would be try to understand how let's say, the interest for climate change came about, whether, let's say, the World Bank and also the Inter-American Development Bank, whether climate change has always been into the core mission and business of this institution, or whether it is something that came about a bit more recently. So that's
Gian, do you want me to start with the strategy? How the decision was made. First of all, let me say how happy I am to be here. As Laura said, it feels like going back home, and I would like to say to the students and the participants how the PhD on climate change shaped my career, and it made me arriving where I am now. So it's I'm very happy to be here to share my experience. In terms of strategy, we work on different areas on climate change, and in three main topics. The first one is to try to align climate and development. So as Laura said, our mission. Two core mission is reduce poverty and share prosperity. So climate change step in, and we want to align climate and development because any action on climate should not undermine what is the development path of the countries that we work with. So there is a stream of research at the World Bank, for example, now which are called country climate and development reports, but to look on how climate and development interlink and try to find the win-win situation that could favor climate change and development. And then this will help both the planning and the policies that the World Bank develop and support the country with. The second one is, so within the first one, there is all the analytics and the planning. The second one is to align the World Bank operations to the Paris Agreement by 2023. All the operation will be aligned to the Paris Agreement. That means working with the countries to make sure that all the investment are consistent with low carbon development and adaptation. The third point within the first area is climate finance, so increasing our climate finance as a scale. Now in 2020, 2021, our investment on climate finance was $21 billion. So when we work on the system transition and as a strategic approach, and the main sectors and where we do both operations and knowledge is water, food, agriculture, land, city, transport, energy, and manufacturing, in addition to the financing. And the third area is how to finance the transition. And also here we have both operations, strategies, and research. What is needed is what has been estimated is 4 trillion per year to 2030 globally in developing countries. So we work with developing countries to boost the domestic resources, leverage private capitals, and working with our concessional financing to leverage these opportunities. This is this is the new strategy on climate change adaptation of the World Bank, 2021-2026. Gianleo will speak a bit of how we evolved to this.
Yeah, and thanks, Lorenzo. Yeah, I think one piece of discussion that is probably interesting is, and I mean, we don't want to repeat too much because in governance structure, IDB and the World Bank, and as Laura mentioned, the other multilaterals do look very much similar. I mean, we coordinate a lot. So I won't really indulge much in the strategy of the IDB. I'm just mentioning that climate change is one of the 5 investment priorities of our Vision 2025. That is the latest strategy. But probably more interesting is how this has changed over the years in all the multilaterals, especially like compared to when Laura, Lorenzo, and I started the PhD in 2012 and started working with these organizations back then, to what we do now and what it is climate change in this organization now. As a topic, climate change started in late 2000s with a very much focus on donor resources, concessional finance, the GEF, Global Environmental Facility, and the climate investment funds, let's say the first big donor vehicles dedicated to climate, were all set it up, and especially the climate investment fund set it up and structured in the let's say first decades of the 2000s, and especially for the ADB, the first climate change unit, before it was a team, then became a unit underneath the division, and now is a department, started basically those years with a very niche mandate of channeling donor money to countries for climate change aligned investments, try to really increase and generate a pipeline of pilots. You guys can think of the first investments in renewable energy, the first wind farms, the first investments in climate smart agriculture, and first also planning and at national level of mitigation and adaptation plans. This became the group inside the multilaterals. The climate change units and team became divisions, starting to really manage a bigger agenda, still focus on concessional money, but also starting to look at, let's say, creating a line of operation for the institutions, and doing more and more in terms of planning, the preparation. As multilaterals, we always accompany the countries to the COPs. We participate in the COPs. So the business became really like a line of lending and operation for us, and all the multilaterals started putting like minimum allocation to climate change of their whole portfolio. So that allocation has been increasing. In the case of IDB now, we are at 30%. That means that on average in a year, actually on a total in a year, 30% of the operation needs to be qualified as climate. And the qualification comes with a methodology that is agreed across MDBs. So for all MDBs, we all understand and agree on what we can consider climate finance, both in mitigation and adaptation. With Paris Agreement, as Laura mentioned, and the alignment to Paris that Lorenzo mentioned, the game has changed again, because now it's no longer just looking at a minimum allocation to climate. Now we're looking at how consistent with climate change future, with mitigation and adaptation goals, are all the operations of the banks. Doesn't mean that all the operations need to be climate, but means that not one of the operations can be very detrimental to climate if there are other opportunities available. All multilaterals don't invest anymore, don't support anymore any coal, very little fossil fuels generation, fossil-based generation of energy. But even for other investments now, we have to show that there are no other opportunities available that are not climate friendly. And even when we do something that can be considered, let's say, against, let's say, supporting climate change like global warming, we have to justify and take steps to mitigate the effect. In the case of the ADB, now climate and prevention of disaster risk related to climate is also part of the safeguards. So all projects that are done, if they are screened, all projects need to be screened for climate change related risks, especially on the physical side. And if a project is considered medium or high risk on physical climate change, has to do like a full disaster risk assessment needs to be developed. And again, it's not that we cannot do those projects, but all the steps potentially to prevent or to adapt the project needs to be considered when the project is approved by the board. At the personal level, and say as a climate professional level, what does this mean? That personally, I no longer work just in my climate change unit. I'm actually now seconded to the financial markets unit because I'm supporting the greening, let's say, of all the projects we have in the financial markets divisions with governments. You can think about bonds, sovereign bonds, with financial institutions, state-owned banks, state-owned utilities, meaning that I'm no longer just looking at green finance, renewable energy credit lines, but now I'm looking at any type of operations we have with the institutions and trying to find maximizing their climate change opportunity or trying to reduce the climate change risks that are still implied and exposed in their portfolio. So that's what we mean is like the climate is becoming less of a niche topic in the banks and now becoming a mainstream issue because Article 2C of Paris Agreement is asking all financial institutions to completely align to the objective of the Paris Agreement, and multilaterals are at the forefront of this obligation. We all have a shared alignment commitment to 2023, but again, it's not just development finance. A significant number, I think, is 500 financial institutions with the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero have now committed to be aligned to Paris Agreement and actually aligned to an objective of net zero in the medium term. I think what the agreement is to start looking at net zero for 2050. So that's what has changed in the financial industry. It is no longer a niche, it's now a mainstream issue to align to climate change. Enrica, back to you.
Thank you.
I still see only Lorenzo.
Yeah, I would move on with the, let's say, 2 additional questions, and then I would actually leave quite some time to questions, because I would guess there are many. And by the way, people listening, you could type your questions either in the chat, or you can also raise your hands, and I'll give you the possibility to directly ask your questions. So maybe while people get ready to ask some question, I think it would be interesting and also useful for the students listening to us to give some example of your daily work, and perhaps also how the skills and the things that you learn during the PhD program are actually being used in your daily work. I don't know who wants to go first.
I can start maybe.
Thank you.
Laura, do you want to start again, or we do reverse? Okay.
I can start, and thank you. So I, at the World Bank, at least if you work on the technical side, not the management level, you usually I'm in the water group, which means that I work on water projects from irrigation, water resources management, including the big dams and water supply sanitation project. So all the projects related to water. And then everybody is also supposed to be part of some global solution groups, we call them in the World Bank, which is like the global work. And that's more the research, the latest thinking about certain topics. So I'm in the climate change global solution group, and I'm one of the focal points for the analytics on climate change. So that's directly linked to my PhD thesis. So at the World Bank, usually when you enter after a PhD or a master at the beginning, you are the one crunching the numbers, which means that the first years we were there, I think I can speak also for Lorenzo and Cian, we were the ones doing the analysis, stress testing project for like robustness to climate change, resilience to flood, resilience of the financial system. And then as you move on, you don't do the number crunching anymore, but you set the agenda. So part of my daily job is to support teams in their conversation to the client, to explain to them what is the latest thinking about climate change in terms of analytics. How can we best support them develop, for example, infrastructure development plan that consider all the potential risk and uncertainties related to climate change and other uncertainties. So one of the paper in my thesis was about this method that at the time was not very widespread. It's called decision making under uncertainty, which basically rather than relying on sensitivity analysis at the end of the economic analysis of a project. For example, we have an MPV and you do some sensitivity analysis. It starts from the other way around, just stress testing the options that you have as many times as possible and identify the breaking point of your investment. That helps having a perfect understanding of to what extent your project can protect you and what else you need to do to make sure to protect your, for example, your population from a flood if these conditions are not acceptable to your client. So now we are mainstreaming this type of methodology all across the World Bank. And one of my roles is to make sure that it's always integrated in the planning and the planning exercises that we do with the client, and also in the stress testing of the specific infrastructure design. So this is one thing at the more global level. There's still a lot of work to do to move this forward, but this is some of the discussion. Another example is, so I work on the infrastructure investment related to water, for example, dam rehabilitation or the design of an irrigation system and or rehabilitation. So as part of our job, as Cian said, basically we have to make sure that every investment is stress test or it does a screening for climate change, and that the potential risks are explicitly and well addressed, and also that they're well addressed, and the whole system is in place to make sure that the project will not be adapted to the conditions today, but it also will work in the future. So that is with relation to climate change. Then, of course, especially working in Africa, the government has so many other priorities. So all the work that we do is trying to balance this climate change related priorities to others that the government and the beneficiaries, so the population, may have. And but really, it is getting, so we get more and more requests from the clients and the teams, as John said. I mean, it's really now, it's no longer a niche thing, the climate change analysis. It started also at the World Bank as some ancillary exercise when we prepare projects, sort of ticking the box, but nowadays it's getting more and more embedded in how we design the project. Of course, a lot of work remains, so I think there will be more and more needs of people that really understand climate change, or they come out of a master's like yours, and especially the multidisciplinarity aspect of it as well, like not so much single sectoriality, but being able to see the bigger picture as well, I think is something that we get more and more requests on. So maybe Lorenzo, you want to add something?
Shall I bring an example? Gianleo, do you want to go first?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Go, Lorenzo.
Okay. So, so my job is actually not disaster risk management anymore. So I started to work as consultant on disaster risk management because of during my PhD I did analysis on the economics of flood risk. So that was my entry point. And from consultant, I became specialist, then senior specialist, and now I work as sector leader for sustainable development, which covers agriculture, environment, social development, urban development, disaster risk management, and water. I'm doing this from a country office, which is in Ghana, which covers Ghana, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. More or less the portfolio of these operations is around $2 billion US dollars. And from my side, I'm a bit of a coordinator from the country office for all these sectors. Obviously, in the sectors, there are many staff and managers, but I'm looking at the bigger picture typically and try to solve problems. So looking at the bigger picture, one of the important points now is climate change, on the important area of work. And as I mentioned before, as part of the new climate change action plan, the bank is looking at on how mainstreaming climate action into development and to find these interlinks. So as part of our work of advocacy and technical assistance and recommendation for policy reforms or investment, development investment, we look at in these reports on different sectors, and we look on how for recommendations for climate actions across different sectors. So as Laura and Gianleo mentioned before, now climate change cut across all the sectors where we work. It goes from, as I mentioned before, energy, transport, agriculture, water, environment, but also health, social protection, macro finance, fiscal governance, private sector engagement, competitors, innovation, technology. So we work in all these areas, and now in these reports, all these areas, all these sectors are looking from a climate lens to come up with a recommendation for the countries that we are working with. And for me, my role is to try to coordinate, try to come up with a meaningful and readable report, which provide insights. For example, we use computable general equilibrium models that you might see, I don't know, in the courses, or integrated assessment models, or the models that Enrica works on to assess the impacts of different policies, and we try to translate them into recommendations. Our advantage from the World Bank side is that we work directly with the client in the country. So I have direct access, for example, speak with the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Energy, of the various ministers, and we provide also the finance to these actions as much as we can, because the needs are huge, our portfolios are limited. So in that terms, our position is we have quite a leverage in some countries, and we use this leverage to provide a recommendation and do advocacy on climate. That's more or less my role and how I arrived.
I'll complete the picture, because I always was a bit of a different animal in the PhD, because I come from banking. So I graduated in economics. I was a banker before even the PhD faculty at the beginning was asking me why I was there. But again, I started at the ADB while during the PhD. My thesis was on de-risking financial structures for climate investments. So using donor money to take off from the investor some of the risk related to new technology, unproven business cases, uncertainty regarding climate data, climate scenarios, and performance of the technologies. And I was working with CPI, with Climate Policy Initiative in Venice. From there, I started collaborating with the ADB and as a consultant as well, specifically managing one of the climate investment funds, the one dedicated to adaptation and resiliency, the pilot program for climate resiliency. And after that, and that my role, and that's one of the, let's say, typical role of multilaterals, was to manage the money from donors, channeling the money to the various investments, and just making sure that the money was being used effectively, efficiently, typically maximizing, let's say, the investor money related to a single dollar of donors. From there, within the ADB, I moved to more like research, like a wider agenda oriented to research as a climate economist, where I'm still focusing on financial aspects, but I was looking at sustainable infrastructure, capital markets development, financial engineering from a strategy point of view and a research point of view, mostly publishing papers and organizing conferences and dialogues. And now in the last 2 years, I've transitioned closer to operations as a senior specialist in the financial markets division. And here we do financial structuring. So we support clients in really understanding how to generate and organize financial instruments for climate change investments, or we support them in their own issuance of instruments, as you might be familiar with green bonds. So now we are supporting sovereign countries, public banks and utilities in designing their green bonds emission program, identifying the project that could qualify as green, speaking to investors, selling these bonds, reporting on the impacts. So it's much more related to creating capacities with clients and creating capacities in the markets, not just with our clients, but also working with stock exchanges to, let's say, create awareness in Latin America, in my case, on the opportunities to invest in a climate-related and climate-smart way.
Thank you. Thanks. I think all this was actually very informative and I would say inspiring, at least from the perspective. If I were a student, I would have actually quite some questions. So let me open the floor for questions. As I just said, you can either raise your hand or type your question in the chat. Yeah, usually someone has to break the ice. Maybe, okay, while waiting, you could say a few words regarding internship and collaboration opportunities especially because I think Laura, at least as far as I remember, you started off as an intern at the World Bank. So maybe you could say a few words to the student. What would be the process if any of them would like to do an internship at the World Bank, or Gianleo, also the Inter-American Development Bank? What is the process? What should they do?
Yeah, thanks. So actually, I think I started for luck at the World Bank. So I went, how I got to the World Bank is that we were at the conference for the PhD, and I met someone that worked at the World Bank, and I told him I really wanted to go and work there. So he told me, why don't you come for a conference we have in Washington every year on sustainable development? And I organized some coffees with people that you can meet. And so I went, and one of these people I had coffee with was looking for someone to help with some analytics, and it was similar to what I was doing for my thesis. So she just said if I wanted to stay. So that's why I think it was I was very lucky, and I had an amazing team when I first arrived. We call it a short-term consultant. So you just get a few days of work or a few months of work. In a year, it can be maximum 150 days of work in the year. And then after that, a few years later, I finished my thesis and I applied for the Young Professional Program, the YPP, which is a very good program for, I think you have to be under 32. And it's a very structured program. If you get shortlisted, you have interviews in Paris or in Washington. Nowadays, probably they're virtual, I don't know, with COVID. And that is how I officially joined the World Bank. So yeah, it was not a formal internship how I joined, but I think the meeting people is probably the best. And yeah, you sort of have to be there at the right moment. And there are lots of topics that we study in Venice that can be helpful to people managing projects at the World Bank. So it's these informal challenges, at least for me, they work best. And I see a raised hand, Lorenzo.
Yes, no, I wanted to add, I had the same way of entering into the World Bank. In fact, the same person that invited Laura didn't invite me. But in any case, I didn't give up. It's a very highly competitive place. So there's a lot of people that are trying to enter, both on the consultancy side and staff. So the typical way is to enter as consultant. I had the similar pathway of Laura, but I was not formally entering in the program. But after 2 years of consultancy, I managed to get a staff position. And yeah, I wanted to add on the internship, and actually I see that Enrica is typing because I've been looking into the page. So I think it's the same. So this is the internship. So the Young Professional Program is the one that Laura did. It's super competitive and it's pretty hard, but the best way to enter into the bank. Laura will be for sure a big director. But there is also other opportunities which are internship. I tried that at my time. I never managed, never succeed. But we see some sometimes the managers, because all the applications they are received by HR, when they go to the managers share with the teams, and the teams might say, okay, this person could help us here or there. So there are two programs. One is the bank internship program, and they see I posted here, they receive applications until January 31st. And the second one is the Junior Professional Associate, which is sponsored typically by the country. In this case will be Italy or your country of origin. And then here you get a 2 years contract with the World Bank, but paid by your country. Again, we received some of them. For example, we have one in our unit from Switzerland. So some others. are in other teams. But yeah, so the best way for sure is to meet people. It's very important, the personal relation, because in any case, also the interns are selected by manager, not directly because we don't know them. They come from all around the world, the CVs. So you need to, if you have someone or know someone, and that person can help you to meet other people, and this is how you develop your network. So creating a network is very important.
Yeah, I think, like I always say, like there are two ways to get in multilaterals: one institutional, one relational. So I think you have to play both. You have to try with both. IDB, I put a link. The IDB has a similar, let's say, YPP program, internship programs. Usually there are two winter and summer interns. But in my case as well, I entered through let's say, connection. During my thesis, I was doing case studies on projects from the IDB and the World Bank. So I spent at the World Bank my summer. We had a period abroad, like a minimum 3 months abroad program at the PhD, and I went to the World Bank because I was working on a paper on a dam financed by the World Bank, and then I did the same for the thesis with the IDB. So I got to know the people. They needed somebody to do blended finance modeling, and I was there. So like before they issued a terms of reference for a consultancy position, they sent me the opportunity, and I did apply. I mean, you have to follow the standard process. It helps a lot if you know already the people and they know you, because in this way there are so many opportunities. Oftentimes it's difficult to see them, and especially to go and see the ones you are better fit compared to others. As Lorenzo mentioned, we receive in this global, let's say, internship programs, we receive hundreds of CVs. It's not always easy to screen on a few lines of a CV, and much better if somebody is proactive, reaches out, and has coffee, or just an email exchange many times can go a long way. So that's the invitation to see what we do, understand where you could be a good fit, and then try to get to know the people behind the project, behind the papers you like, and don't be afraid to just stick your neck out and call people.
I see that there is a question by Domenico, so maybe I can.
Yeah, it's a very technical question, but
yes,
yeah.
and I'm happy to follow up later. But thank you for breaking the ice, Domenico. And so there are different levels, a bit like how to enter the bank. There are also different levels of what type of stress tests different teams do. From the one that is more like, let's say, is a bit more lighter, that every project has to do, to the ones that are more in depth, like the ones I was talking about, decision making under uncertainty. So it really very much depends on how the engagement with the client starts and what the timing for the project is. So the bare minimum that we have to do today, the requirements are becoming more stringent. I think next year they will be much more stringent, but it's basically, we have a portal in which you introduce the location and the characteristic of your project, and you have the possible impact in that region on the project and possibly also of the project. But it's sort of a light screening that at least you have to show you have done that, and in case you have some red flags, you have to show how you have addressed this possible risk. That is really the bare minimum. Then we have developed different set of guidelines, and then the World Bank is what's called institutionalizing a new indicator, because you ask about indicator called the resilience rating. It means that every project will be given a score based on the robustness of the stress testing that they do. And now it's still at the pilot phase, but basically means that if you just do this quick screening, you will be rated D. And whereas if you do like thousands of scenario screening, multiple options, like different criteria, like analysis, you can get to A or A+. And the idea is that slowly the projects that are D, that are rated low, I mean, so only the projects that have nothing to do with climate change, for example, I don't know, like some health project or some other project that are not affected directly by climate change, will be able to have this rating. All the other ones will have to aim to A+ or A, which means that we have one issue, because usually when teams prepare investment project for the client, they often have very, very tight timeline. So it's very difficult to do an in-depth stress testing of the project you are doing if engagement starts with the request of the government and you just go ahead. What we try to do is, with the technical assistance we mentioned before, or the planning exercises that we do in support of the government, to try to start doing the stress testing before we have the investment, the actual lending with the government. So when we come, the government already has a few options that have been stress tested, and he asks us to finance the one that is most robust to climate change. I try to simplify a lot, so I'm happy also to follow up with you separately if you want to know more about the techniques or the technical answer. But in terms of processes, we are still, I mean, it's very much improved, but we still have these different levels, from a light screening to a very, very in-depth one. And for now, the very compulsory one is still the light screening. I hope this clarified some of you.
Thank you, Laura. So it's almost time, let's say, to close the meeting. So
maybe I can answer. Does Federica ask one question?
Okay, now I see the question. Yes.
And so yes, I think I have friends that that work at the World Bank, and they don't have a PhD. So you can have master and work experience, or just a master's. I think some of the programs, at least at the World Bank, that Lorenzo posted, are for people with masters only, like the Africa Fellowship Program, or this regional EAP and MENA program. But there's also an analyst program that I think last year was suspended because of COVID. Basically recruits people that have just finished their masters, and that usually like work across super different teams. It's quite interesting program, and it's sort of like and it's paid for by the bank, not by the governments like the other one that Lorenzo mentioned before. So definitely there are lots of ways of entering. So definitely worth trying. If you don't have the master yet, it's quite difficult, but once you have the masters, there are different way of entering. Yeah, and I think Lorenzo has pasted some information.
So my experience, so I've been reaching out to World Bank staff also when I was doing my master, and I went to Washington because I was in Florida at that time, and I went to Washington, and many people told me, if you want to work here, it would be very good to have a PhD. It's not required, there are many people without it, but it's surely an added value. So for sure, collaboration can start also to internship, but that's what I was recommended, and in fact, that's what I did.
Yeah, me too, actually. It was also recommended that.
Thank you. Yeah, Gianleo?
Would be a problem if we wouldn't recommend it would be a problem if we wouldn't recommend the PhD with you there, Enrica. But actually,
I mean,
definitely, I think if it fits your interest.
No, I believe that even within this type
don't
of
take it as a limitation. I think the master is already.
Yeah, exactly. I was about to say that even within this type of organization, I guess there are different, I mean, you can work there at different levels. So a PhD would give you the ability to achieve certain levels, but still there are some tasks that can and need to be performed by people with a master. That would be enough. And with a master of research like ours, which anyway provide a very technical training and very specific.
In fact, there are directors without PhD. It's not that you need a PhD, but it was an advantage.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
clear.
There are many ways you can tailor a route at the MDBs, and I mean, doing development, doing a lot of research in every level. The PhD also helps, like always helps. Many friends who started at master are doing PhDs while working, or like, you know, taking a few years away, going to do the PhD, coming back. So like it's not written in stone. There is no single recipe or single route. Just have a look, see what takes your eye, and again, as probably you should have gotten from our 3 experiences, get in contact, like follow closely, and trying to understand the single project or the single things that we do.
And if I may add also, another thing that actually at the World Bank is very helpful is languages. So if you have any interest in languages or any spare time, just learn languages. Like we all speak several languages, and there is always need for people that speak more than 2 or 3 languages. So that's also another recommendation, especially if you want to work in operations, so more the investment on the client side.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This was great. For those listening, if you're interested, you can get in touch with me, and I can always try to put you in touch with Laura, Gianleo, and Lorenzo. And yeah, it was very nice to have you here all, and hopefully we'll be in touch. Thank you.
Yes, we hope so.
Ciao.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting us.
Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you.
And good luck, everybody.
Yes, good luck.
Students.
Ciao, ciao.
And
Bye.
ciao.